Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. My name is Paul Wicks. I'm a neuropsychologist by training. I'm an independent consultant and I've been an advisor with Sano Genetics for about 18 months now. I'm really pleased to be able to host today's webinar about meaningful technology, putting participants at the heart of research. This is something I've done professionally. It also means a lot to me as a patient, as a caregiver to somebody with lived experience of motor neuron disease, as a research guinea pig to many, many studies. And I'd say when I started off my, undergraduate studies in research, these people we got data from were called subjects. And then at some point, they escalated to becoming participants. And I would say over the next 10 to 15 years, this whole amorphous concept came around that maybe research isn't just something done by people at universities, that science is a way of thinking about things and a process. It's not something that you are or that you're born with, or that being a scientist makes you right or what have you. It's not a special power that only certain people have. And I think that's a more enlightened and much more powerful and efficient way of doing research. But how do we actually put that into practice, and how do we square that with how busy all the researchers that we know are, all the clinicians that we know who want to take part in research, and how we're going to deal with some of the massive legal and ethical implications that much greater level population research involves, whether that's through genomics registries or big data on wearables, or even what we have to do for COVID track and trace and vaccination passports and all the rest of it. So we've got a great panel for you today to go through all these topics and more. We do have a chat window and a Q&A window. I think the plan for today is we're going to start off with a brief presentation from Patrick, for CEO of Sano Genetics, just to orientate us to what we're going to be talking about today. And then we'll invite into the discussion Rakhi Rajani from Genomics England and Jillian Hastings Ward, who chairs the patient participant panel, for the Genomics England group as well. And then we'll sort of have a bit of a roundtable discussion, but please do feel free to put in your questions into the chat or Q&A, and probably about half past the hour, we'll start bringing more of those questions into the debate and the discussion. And please don't be shy to ask any hard or challenging conversations. It's very much what we're hoping to look forward to today. Right, so I will hand over to Patrick to walk us through a little bit of background and share some information.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. I just need you to enable screen sharing, and I promise this is going to be very brief. Great. Okay, so what I wanted to do quickly is just kind of set the scene for why we're hosting this conversation, and give you a little bit of background of the work that Sano and Genomics England have been doing over the last 18 months or so, just to give you some context. I'm not going to do any in-depth demos or anything like that, but I want to really focus on the motivation of why participant engagement is important. And hopefully just give me a thumbs up that you all can see my screen here. I'm going to actually focus for a moment on the researcher's perspective of why participant engagement is important. And the reason for that is, having taken part in research projects, and anyone in the audience who has as well will understand that it's probably pretty self-evident why having a great participant experience is important and makes you want to come back and continue participating. Often the more challenging part to articulate and get across is why it's relevant for research. And I come from a research background, and so I've experienced some of these firsthand of how actually research can be improved from participant engagement. Before I jump in, if you want to join the conversation on Twitter, I've added the handles there. And it's also just a note that the webinar is going to be recorded. Everyone who signed up will get a copy of the recording emailed out to them. But if you don't want your likeness to be recorded, then your names won't show up or anything like that, unless you raise your hand and get invited on stage or something like that. So just an FYI. Okay, so as I mentioned before, why should researchers care about participant engagement? A couple reasons. So first, the world, as we know, is transitioning into more and more personalized and data-driven medicine. And this means that the scale of recruitment goals for research is going only in one direction, which is up, and the data requirements have never been higher. So it's just put a snapshot here from, this is a UK-focused report, but you can see in some of the upcoming projects, there's a target of enrolling 5 million participants. And we know that Genomics England has already done whole genome sequencing successfully on 100,000, more than 100,000, with plans to go up. So these the 5 million is a meaningful percentage of the entire country's population. So it has to move from a purely an act of altruism to something that's much more holistic. And this is coming from some of our survey work that we've actually done as part of this project, but we know that participants have a very high expectation out of their research experience, including convenience to take part, communication about what impact that they're having, more feedback of results, and the opportunity to contribute their experience. So there's a few examples that you can see here from both small number of participants in the 100K Genomes Project and non-100K Genomes Project participants in the UK that completed the survey, that things like having access to copy their own research data, knowing that the research was being shared with other scientists and not just kind of being used by a single group, also having access to healthcare professionals, all of these things that, as we know from a research perspective, are really actually very trivial to, or not trivial to implement, but are nonetheless really important and could be deal breakers for some participants if they know that these are not being met. This is another big motivator for myself in particular, and part of why we got into starting the company in the first place is many projects have plans to recontact participants, but there's a big Achilles heel, which is most of them are not able really to operationalize it because the consent wasn't right in the first place, or the technology doesn't exist. So this was a study that came out about 5 years ago now, that identified people in large genetic databases that had genetic variants that ought to have given them a very severe rare disease, but were presumed to be healthy. However, the Achilles heel was they weren't able to recontact any of these people. So we didn't really know whether it was that they were carrying another genetic variant that made them resilient. Maybe it was a sequencing error in the machine that they actually didn't have the genetic variant at all, or maybe they were indeed a scientific discovery waiting to happen. So one of the big issues, I think, is that some of the most impactful research just becomes impractical or impossible to conduct if you don't have these systems in place. And I think one thing that isn't so obvious, but we know going through this process, is that participant engagement just isn't as simple as putting up a new website or building an app. As soon as you get into uncovering each of the stakeholders' needs, you realize that it goes far beyond just send me an email when there's a new research study for me. People want to understand the impact that their data is having, see new research opportunities in real time. And this has to fit into what's a changing legal and regulatory framework. So I think another reason to have a participant engagement strategy is it gives you an option that if there are unforeseeable technological and legal changes, then you have a way to go back to the individuals who took part in the first place and seek clarity. So from a technology standpoint, when the stem cell wave came across, many of the consents in biobanks were not compatible with generating stem cells from samples that participants had given. And if they weren't able to recontact participants, then this left them at a scientific dead end. But simply having that ability to reconsent, to say a new opportunity is here, do you agree for us to use your information for this new technological application or not? Those who were able to recontact were able to ride this wave. And the same applies for regulation. As things change in unforeseeable ways, being able to go back to the source is always important. So this is, I think, my second to last slide. So towards this end, we've been co-developing our platform with Genomics England, as well as other partners. And what we've tried to do throughout the process is really painstakingly document the process as well as the findings. So on our website, there's about 10 or 12 page document that goes through some of the early co-development workshops and surveys that we ran as part of the project. Actually, just out today, there's a report that was put together by the PhD Foundation, commissioned by Genomics England, looking at the wider legal, regulatory, and ethical considerations of participant engagement in general, as well as in the specific context of this project. And I'll just say, from a platform and product perspective, one of the things we focused on early was, from the perspective of participants, what were the high value features in a participant engagement platform that goes beyond just a simple website. And some of the areas we explored were, these are high level concepts: research matchmaker, participant voice, research catalog, my contributions, wearables, and data and reports. And within each of those, there are different exemplar product features. There's much more detail in the report that I mentioned on the previous slide. But underpinning all these product categories are also themes that continue to come up through our co-development process, which is participants want easier ways to engage with research and actually be part of that discovery process that Paul mentioned earlier. Participants want better ways to capture their lived experience. I think we often think about the medical record as a gold standard, but any participant who's gotten access to their own medical records knows that there can be serious errors in those medical records. So it's probably time to not think about it as either or, but both and. How can we take the clinical information that has clearly gold standard in some areas and the patient's lived experience, which can be the gold standard in other areas, and bring those together. And then finally, transparency and trust in the process. So that participants know where their data is being used, what it's being used for, and have trust in the different parties in the process that are making use of that. So I'll stop there. If you'd like to speak to us more about where the platform is today, then I've put Ross's email from our team on there. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. And looking forward to the discussion with Rakhi and Jillian and Paul.
That's great, Patrick. Thank you. And just as you were talking, I just thought I'd pop a link to that report in the chat in case people wanted to take a look at it and sort of see all the work that's gone into that. So great. Well, Rakhi and Jillian, I'll come to you next, and maybe just get you to say a few words about your role and what you've been doing. First of all, just so everyone knows who you are, and then maybe hear a little bit about how the sort of view has evolved over the last few years in which you've been involved in this. So Rakhi, do you want to start first?
Sure, thanks Paul, and thanks Patrick for that overview. My name is Rakhi Rajani. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at Genomics England. I have a background in psychology as well, and innovation, and we develop products and services with human beings and culture and society at the core of what we do. So we are currently building, actually at Genomics England, a team of folks who understand how to talk to people and participants and engage in research so that we co-create solutions. We're very big on, we're developing with, not for, as our kind of guiding light into how we think about products and services that we want to put out into the world.
And that's pretty controversial. I mean, I don't know if any of my former genetics friends are listening, hopefully not, but lots of the geneticists I used to know, to be honest with you, spent most of their time with mice, or maybe zebrafish. I guess nowadays mostly computers, and maybe this concept of co-creation, co-design. Maybe you could say a little bit about what that really means, because it sounds like a buzzword or a jargony thing if you don't know what it means. So what does it really mean in practice from your side? So
especially when it comes to things like the tool that Patrick showed you just now, which is a software, something that people can use. Instead of saying what are the requirements, what are the 7 features we need to put in place here, and taking the approach of let's throw some requirements over the fence and now some folks just go and build that thing. Co-creation and co-design and co-development is about including and engaging with the people who are going to use these things in the creation of the tool itself. So it's less about let's go into Jillian, somebody else, and say what is it that you need, and now let's put it in there. It's saying let's work together on defining the solution, the outcome that it is we need, because you know what you need. And we can help facilitate that conversation, but we can also bring other skills to the table. And so it is very much a how do we come together to develop the outcome.
Yeah, no, that's great. Because often when you're involving yourself in the health system or even research, it feels like a system that's been set up for the institution, maybe not so much for the end user. But nowadays, when you use technology or a web system, or even you're just a customer, so much has clearly been done with the customer in mind. When you're a participant or a patient, you don't really feel like a customer, you feel like an inconvenience sometimes to the system. So Jillian, love to hear more about your experiences, and maybe you could tell us, what is co-development on the other side of the table? How is it different to the way things have been in the past, the status quo?
Okay, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for inviting me along today. It's great to be co-producing this seminar with you guys. This is a great example, actually, of exactly what Rakhi was just talking about, that it's about a conversation where you both bring the skills and the lived experience that certainly I, as a mum of a very rare child, bring to talk to each other about what would really work for us and what we'd like to see next. So my name is Jillian. I'm the chair of the participant panel at Genomics England, and we are here to represent the interests of the people who signed up initially for the 100,000 Genomes Project. So as Genomics England moves forward now into looking after data which is coming through from the Genomic COVID project and from the Genomic medicine service through the NHS, people in there who volunteer to be part of research as well, that cohort of people in their data bank is going to grow and grow. And we're very keen to make sure that all these opportunities that Patrick and Paul and Rakhi were talking about are able to be fed back to people who volunteer to be part of this. Nobody's compelled anybody to sign up for anything, and we want to make sure that people who choose to share their information are able to benefit from that in the future.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been doing over the past few years is talking to Genomics England about lots of the different ways that they are using our data at the moment, and trying to open as many doors as possible, really, between the research communities who are looking from a very scientific perspective and the people out there with lived experience and everyday living with rare conditions and some forms of cancer, which were the reasons that we were put into the project initially. It's been patchy, but we're getting somewhere now. So, you know, that's one of the things that Patrick and his colleagues have been working hard on with this platform has been to ask members of the participant panel, all of whom have lived experience as rare disease patients or carers of somebody with a cancer or a rare disease. We've been asked to feed in at various points in the product development process so far, you know, what is it that we would value, and what are the most important things for such a product to deliver, and what perhaps are less important, because as Rakhi was saying, you know, you as a developer perhaps have some ideas about what you think would be useful, but in fact that may not necessarily be of greatest value to the people who you're trying to help.
Yeah, I could just add a quick anecdote. Very early in the project, we kind of pitched the idea to the participant panel that that Jillian chairs, and it was really amazing actually, because we kind of got 5 minutes into the overview, and then the panel basically just discussed and debated with one another for the remaining time period of all those things you just mentioned. So it's I think we also shouldn't assume that participants necessarily have the same point of view on everything, right? It's a very rich and heterogeneous group of viewpoints on anything, and that a lot of power comes out of that, because you can kind of, through debate and discussion, determine what the way forward looks like.
And how does that differ? I mean, maybe Rakhi, you can say, how does this differ from, say, participant involvement in governance, right? Because I think there's a whole hierarchy of involvement, and it can, you know, it have some consultation at one level, but then there are other situations where actually someone, say with lived experience, actually has, you know, a vote on a committee or veto rights over who can use data, that type of thing. Where's the line between sort of co-creation, yes, we've had a chat about it, and I know we're actually empowering somebody to actually, you know, they have as much of a kill switch as a member of staff? Where does that line sit for you?
I think so. Participants, I think Jillian, feel free to jump in here, but participants have been at the core of what we do at Genomics England for a very long time, right? We are and have always been very considered and have taken ethics and governance and all those things very, very seriously, especially as we're dealing with patient data. I'm not sure I can tell you that this is the line, and that is why we engage in conversation. That is why we have the participant panel. That is why we have folks from the participant panel sitting on our data access committees and things like that, so that we can make the right decisions through conversation. And I'm reluctant to say there's a line that this is the kill switch. I'm not sure that's not how we think about the problem, right? And that is why we engage.
So before, during, and after, not just a sort of tokenistic tick the box, now off we run to. It's most certainly not tokenistic.
It's most certainly not tokenistic.
But there's a sliding scale there. I mean, on some things it is helpful to have a formal vote, you know, for example, the access review that Rakhi mentioned there. And other things, you know, you can dip in and out of conversations over a number of years and feel that you're contributing here and there. It's not, yeah, I think there's no hard and fast rules necessarily.
And I mean, I think, I imagine we probably don't need to spend much time agreeing vigorously with each other about the benefits of research and why people take part. I mean, we all you know, believe in altruistic contributions. We all want, you know, better treatments, more effective healthcare, better value. But what are some of the concerns that you, maybe Jillian, that you hear from participants or Patrick, that you've had to sort of wire into your system? Because you know, maybe not in the health domain exclusively, but in the broader public, there will be consideration of things like Cambridge Analytica or various data breaches and hacks and what have you. Surely those considerations must be extra sensitive when considering health and some of the special considerations there are for genomic information. So Gillian, maybe what are some of the experiences or concerns that you hear come up frequently?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think people obviously are quite protective of their health data. You know, and this isn't Facebook. You don't just project what you want. It's actually what's happening in the heart of your life, and that is very private information. But at the same time, people who choose to share that with researchers, they want to make sure it's being used, and they want to make sure that they hear about what it's been used for. So having a two-way connection there is very helpful. But I think also we've been quite cautious in the approach to all of this by saying, well, you know, it's all very well inviting people to record more information, for example, about sleep patterns or medication or whatever it is that they want to tell, that they want to input into the research data bank, because you have to be sure that enough people are going to be doing it in a consistent way, that it's going to be meaningful to the researchers who might look at that someday, and also that there is actually a researcher who's interested at the other end, because otherwise you're just shouting into a bucket and, you know, no one's getting anywhere. So we have to be careful about managing expectations there. And that was something which came out quite strongly in the PhD Foundation report, which I think came out just earlier today that Patrick mentioned. That, you know, it's about managing expectations and focusing in on the things that can really add value without letting people either spend too long taking very detailed notes about something, for example, and then them just not going anywhere, or feeling that they're not entirely sure who's looking at that information once they've handed it over.
Yeah. And Patrick, what are some of the ways that you have to build that in systematically or programmatically to do that in software? Because, you know, if you think of the very privileged relationship between a patient and their doctor, you know, they involve genetic counselling or specialists or what have you, that's a highly trained, highly specialised, you know, privileged conversation. Doing that in software is a really different thing. You know, how do I trust a web browser, or how do I know that, you know, the credentials of, you know, this doctor at this hospital? How does that translate to the web, and how do we ensure that we do the right thing in those ways?
Yeah, that it's a great set of questions. One of the things that came up really early in the workshops that we ran were a number of participants asking whether the research data that had been collected as part of a research project could be shared with their clinical team, for example. And this is often not done, right? When you're in a research project, it sits in research database, and how you design the participant journey as well as the medical practitioner journey through a system like this is really complex. And it's something we've been working a lot on and thinking about, because the ultimate end state where we want to end up is where participants, researchers, clinical teams are able to share data securely amongst one another in order to advance science and the participants' needs and the clinical needs forward in concert. But that's why I said it's much more complex than just having a website, right? Because all of these touch points add complexity. I think another thing that we've been focusing on a lot, which also came up in the PhD report, and is I think really important, especially in the context of medical research, but more generally, is accessibility. That can your website be used by as many people as possible who may have, you know, hearing impairments, visual impairments, issues with color, the list goes on. And you need to make sure people who don't speak English as a first language, for example, how do we design something that isn't just going to fit the needs of the 80% of people who have an iPad and are comfortable using it, but actually the 100% of people, and as close as we can get to it. So thinking about how we, you know, we don't just settle for good enough, but it's got to be cross-device, all of these accessibility issues. Those are some of the kind of product level things that we've had to think about as well.
And have you experienced much in the way of people's journey in coming to that process, right? Because, you know, we all have different feelings and experiences about, maybe if you're old enough to remember when online banking was new, right? And everyone was saying, oh, be really careful of that. And now it's standard. In fact, it's almost difficult to get human banking. But clearly that's a whole journey that's taken a lot of time. You know, in that PhD report, there was a link to a whole review of all these patient online communities, and really said there was a big explosion of them in 2013. Of course, Genomics England was founded in 2012. So, you know, I don't know if there was a chief digital officer, Rakhi, in the first tranche of Genomics England employees, but, you know, it seems to be increasingly sort of the standard front door of these systems. And maybe in the future endeavors of, you know, the 5 million cohort or something, it'd be difficult to do it in any other way than digital, surely, wouldn't it?
I think so. I don't think there was a chief digital officer at the time, but I think what you're saying, Paul, around the evolution of technology and our as humans, our interaction with that technology, whether it's banking apps or websites or online shopping or whatever it is, has given us different mental models about how we can interact with people, with organizations, and also in communities as well. And I think how we've gone on that journey and how we've progressed and what we've learned there absolutely does set us up for an expectation about how we could interact with an organization. And increasingly that is through digital tools and techniques and systems, but that doesn't have to be it. And I think that what we have to acknowledge is that, especially in something like healthcare, which is, emotional, and as Jillian said, you're living that. We have to be considered and considerate about what are the right interaction mechanisms, and not just jump to digital, but figure out what the journey could be and how people want to interact and design those interactions thoughtfully.
Mm-hmm. And I guess one of the things that's been interesting is perhaps our consideration of risk. So one of the concerns about online banking is it might be more prone to fraud or what have you. But it seems like now it is part of our internal calculus. Yes, someone might clone my bank card and buy something on eBay or something like that, but the bank has mechanisms to deal with that. And we probably have all had extra security alerts where I think many years ago my dad bought a couple of tickets to Reading Festival on his credit card for me, and MasterCard phoned him up because they didn't quite think it was credible, this 62-year-old chap going off to Reading Festival, very ageist of them. But we've built that into our everyday calculus, and we probably mostly know what to do now that we think we've been scammed or hacked or what have you. I guess my question is, to what extent has that been a reality for many people in the world of genomics? Touch wood, but we haven't had a major breach in that kind of way that lots of people in a particular disease community have been majorly affected by. That concern is very real. A lot of my experience has been working professionally in the United States, where people's biggest fear is employers finding out, health insurance companies finding out, and that might not just be health insurance, it could also be disability insurance or something like that that's not covered by acts like the Genetics Non-Discrimination Act, GINA. So I was interested to know, the concerns are always there reflexively, but have we seen, or maybe do you have any anecdotes you can share of anyone that's really had these harms? Because I think that the fear of them and the mitigation is very important. But do we see that actually happening in practice, that people have had these types of leakages of records, or that there have been major consequences for an accidental sharing of data?
Not that I'm aware of, and I think that in terms of the conversation around data, that we don't assume that we know what people want their data to be used for, which is why we do engage in dialogue, in have the conversation with, especially for us, with our participant panel, so that we can understand what people are comfortable with. And that is really important. And we have engaged in public dialogue over the years in order to try and understand that, and to get a sense of what people are comfortable with, and what people are accepting of. And that changes over time as well. And we continue to have those dialogues because things change over time as well.
Because there can be a risk, can't there, that in wanting to do the good thing, wanting to do the right thing, we are overly conservative. And an old boss of mine used to argue that in a world where you can get in a motor car and essentially drive what is a controlled explosion at 70 miles an hour with your family checked into the back, actually sharing of data might not be as risky as that, or crossing the road, or in their country, buying a handgun at Walmart or something like that. Yeah, but no, and perhaps these things have not happened to the same extent because we've been more careful, right? So I'm not suggesting that we necessarily want to take the brakes off, but it's saying that there's possibly an equally bad, the sin of omission or the sin of commission, where someone wants their data to have been used more meaningfully, but hasn't had it taken up, hasn't had it sort of had the juice squeezed out of it fully by every researcher that could take an interest because of some of the conservatism in this area. Jillian?
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, I would say, there's legal protections in place about what you can and cannot do. There's an agreement with the insurance industry that genetic information will not be shared at the moment in most cases around things that are present in somebody's genetic makeup. And I think, as we move forward, we need to be as you say, making sure that we make best use of the information without putting anybody at a disadvantage. Because nobody signed up for this to be ending up in a worse position than they were at the beginning.
I'll just add to that, oh, sorry, I'm getting an echo. One of the things that definitely came across loud and clear to me, at least in some of the early workshops we ran, was that generally speaking, participants wanted to share their data with bona fide researchers who were doing important work in their area, with the caveat that they had an understanding that their data was being looked after, used in the right way, and there was a degree of transparency and trust there. And I think we're going to, for a very long time, continue to see those march hand in hand, which is participants will need to have assurances that either they can directly control their data, or they cede that control to an institution that they trust, and then that institution can make decisions on their behalf. And I think in the second case, where the institution makes decisions on your behalf, then real transparency around where specifically and how has my data been used seem to come out of those workshops as don't lock it away, please use it, but keep me informed of what the impact is and who's using it.
So it's more of a relationship, isn't it? And increasingly, as we're asking participants to become involved in research projects for many months or even years, even their whole lives, perhaps, we're making a bigger ask of them. It can be difficult to make those habits stick. I do a blood sample once a month for one of these COVID projects, and they send me a questionnaire and all the rest of it, and yeah, I know exactly what it's for, but it's a little bit burdensome, and sometimes I leave the thing on the side and sort of I literally have to put it in my way when I get dressed in the morning to actually remind myself to do it. And so even with the best intentions, if something's not engaging, if it's not easy, if you don't lower those barriers, then we will see attrition. We've had some questions and comments come up on the chat window and in the Q&A. So I wanted to sort of go through some of those and sort of field them to the group. Because we're recording, we haven't sort of consented to use people's names. I won't be sort of saying it's Jim from Scunthorpe who said this question. So apologies for not crediting you with the question, I guess. But just want to be mindful that not everyone will want to reveal their name. So had a question here in the Q&A. So in this process of co-creation that we were talking about earlier, what are your thoughts on the importance of asking the right questions to the users or the patients, and how does this impact the process and end product? So Rahki, I know you have a lot of expertise from this and prior roles. Would you like to talk about that a little?
Sure, absolutely. I think, Patrick, you might want to come in on how that's worked in this process. But yes, I think the questions you ask absolutely impact the response you're going to get. And I think that that's why we're thoughtful about what are we trying to find out, what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and how do we get there? And sometimes that is through questions, but sometimes that's also in enabling people to design with us, to create with us, or to play with elements of an interface or a system or a journey to demonstrate what they're doing. And so I think storytelling is a big part of this. And sometimes it's not about a question, but the prompt that you give that enables a story to be told that's really important too. So there are a huge range of techniques that we can use to try and get at the outcome that we're solving for, but also to engage people along the way too, whether that's questions, whether that's giving them something to scribble on, whether that's asking them to map out a journey, whether that's asking for a story. I think it's a real range of things, whether it's just spending time with people and understanding their context and what they do during the day. That's another way of gathering that information. So we use absolutely a range of techniques.
I'll just add that the way we approach this project in particular, you hear often conflicting evidence, or conflicting suggestions. One being, the Henry Ford. If we asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses. But the other side is listen and speak to the people that you're hoping to work with, and they'll tell you what they want. And I actually think both ultimately are true. And so we did both in this case. One of the sessions was totally focused on understanding problems. It would be great if X was solved or if X was different. No solutions whatsoever, just understand the problems. And then completely separate sessions where we focused on solutions that were deliberately different, digital, non-digital, crossed, different kind of barriers and get people's reactions of, if this existed, you know, what problems might it solve? How would you change it? And I think only by a kind of iterative process of working around problem solutions, and also giving the ability to go quite wide and not starting with something really constrained and just saying, hey, should this button be here or there? You have to go really wide. Otherwise, you're going to end up at a you know, some kind of local minimum, so to speak, local maximum.
I think you also made a great point there, Patrick, about sometimes you want to put something in front of people and say, look what we've created, and let them tear it apart too, right? Or build on it, because that's a great way to test assumptions. So, yeah.
And I know not everyone in the audience might be a tech nerd, but one of the things that's fascinating is every social media site you've used or search engine or whatever is constantly using you as a participant in hundreds of A/B tests or randomized control tests, where they'll try moving the buy now button over here, or, you know, trying a different image to see if you'll convert to a customer here or there. And what's incredible is that, you know, they would never make a decision about, you know, making the button blue or green on as little data as we regularly use to recommend treatments to people. You know, they've got very well-controlled mechanisms to make these data-driven decisions. So yes, it may be about, you know, what is the good idea to implement, but we actually have experimental, evidence-driven ways of making the how be more efficient. A comment came in that just went privately to the panelists, so I'm going to sort of de-identify it and reframe it a little bit. Somebody shared a very personal and very moving experience of having a child with a rare condition, a very serious condition that ultimately, very sadly, ended her life. And that she was actually a participant in a number of trials many years ago, where ultimately she actually wasn't able to really find out whether or not those trials even, you know, were successful in a sense, and were a useful contribution. So I guess, you know, if and I've seen a lot of similar experiences, I certainly get the sense that that's incredibly frustrating and disappointing, and can breed resentment within certain communities that you know could take a lot to address. So to what extent do we sort of have to overcome these barriers? I mean, to some extent, saying, oh, we'll tell people what their data was worth or what have you, it can feel like a big lift, but in some senses it should be table stakes, right? I mean, to some extent, we're sort of having to correct for the errors of other people, and you know, issues like that should never have happened. But it is quite common that, say, clinical trial participants that I know even today hear about the results of the trial they're in from the press release. You know, they hear about it on the news. Oh, a new Huntington's drug failed. Oh, thanks for telling us. And so, you know, every time a chief investigator or researcher has that opportunity in front of them, they you know, don't treat the participants as the most engaged stakeholder, you know, the whole research community loses out. So maybe Jillian, you want to comment on that? I know you have a lot of experience in this area.
Yeah, I'm just nodding away here, really, Paul. Absolutely agree. And there's some examples that we know of from, not necessarily from within the 100,000 Genomes Project, but certainly from rare disease community more widely, where people have been told there's a new paper been published about their very rare condition, and they read it and they actually recognise it's actually their family member being discussed here, and nobody told them. And that just, as you say, leaves a really bad taste in the mouth, and it's something we really have to avoid in the future. I mean, my own son was the first person diagnosed with his particular genetic variant in the whole of the NHS in Britain. And the way that happened was we were presented with 3 PDF papers from around the world from other patients. Our geneticist said, well, can you read these and tell us whether that sounds like your son? And so, you know, you do have to share quite detailed case studies in the early days to share that information, but it absolutely shouldn't be happening without people's consent, or at least their knowledge. And one thing to say about the information that Genomics England hold is that they would never release data about participants for cohorts of less than 5 people. So you can never re-identify anybody in anything that gets published off the back of that. And that's something which is a standard which I think should definitely carry on, because that's very important protection.
I actually was going to ask a follow-up question on that, because Genomics England, my first interaction with Genomics England was from a research perspective when I was a PhD student, and one of the very different things about the Genomics England model was this trusted research environment where researchers have to log in and data doesn't leave. And I'm curious from, you know, maybe Rakhi's perspective and yours, Jillian, as well, how this model has evolved over the years, and whether you all see that as the future, and that ultimately all of these sorts of projects will have trusted research environments that interact with one another, what you've learned from that process, because I think you were probably one of the first to take that model.
Yeah, I think it's a nice analogy here, actually, and we've always been told that the trusted research environment within Genomics England is like an aquarium. You can go and look at the fish, but you can't take any of the fish away. But actually, I think what the researchers have been finding is that it's an aquarium where they only give you binoculars to look at the fish, so you can't see enough of them at once. And so as time has gone by, they've been working on ways of being able to handle a lot more data within that environment. And that's certainly something which I think makes it more useful for anybody who wants to come in and do some research. And I'm sure Rakhi can tell us a bit more about the technical side of that. But you know, these sorts of things are evolving as we go forward, and as the data that gets collected continues to increase exponentially, then there's going to be a whole lot more of a need to make it as easy as possible to digest the fish, as it were, and to be able to classify them before you start writing about them.
I think two things to note. We take, as Jillian said, and Patrick, you mentioned, we take security of the data incredibly seriously, right? It is de-identified. We don't want people to know who it is, and that is topmost in our minds here. And so we are very considered about who gets access to the data in the research environment and for what purpose. And it's not just available to anyone anywhere. To Jillian's point, the research environments are evolving, and they're also evolving based on the use cases we understand that people want to you know, the outcomes people want to generate by accessing that data, and with the additional data that we're adding to those environments. So as the data increases, you can do more with it, and you can break it down in different ways, and that is what we support. But it's driven by the use cases and the outcomes. But the security of that data and how seriously we take that responsibility is not compromised.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge two comments in the chat of some cases that people pointed out in reaction to my question about, you know, have there been similar breaches. So one is a report about a UK biobank incident where there was a feedback form that I think was in WordPress, from what I can gather, and a CSV file of the names and email addresses of who'd submitted comments was made available. So that wasn't genetic data, but obviously is sort of, you know, in the same sphere, and there's a link there. And then another one was this, you might know more about this, Patrick, the GED match database, so a place where people could voluntarily upload like their text files of 23andMe results or something like that for sort of genealogy and fun projects. But it also existed as a place where the police could, you know, sniff in and see if this little blood sample they found that some serial killer scene might lead to finding you. So there were 1 million records sort of temporarily exposed. So I don't know if you know about those, but had you come across those at all, or do incidents like that inform your thinking and how you think about security?
Yeah, I think that the GED match, we have a podcast, and there's an episode in the 20s or 30s speaking to a genetic genealogist about this very issue when it kicked off. And the big issue really there is what most people were upset about was they were opted into this forensic database, not being asked whether they'd like to opt in, and the default being opting out. And it wasn't clear, you know, in terms and conditions and things like that from the outset that the data would be used for this purpose. So again, kind of back to the trust and transparency, and am I getting what I've signed up for here? If you've signed up for a service that's going to help you find family members, and that morphs into something that's very different, then I think participants have every right to be really upset about that. So I think it's about having the governance process and trust process in place, that things are going to evolve over time as technology and medicine changes, but there needs to be a dialogue, I think, with participants around that. And I think maybe one of the things that these underscore is it's often not a technological, maybe in the WordPress example it is, but it's more often an expectation setting and governance, trust and transparency, rather than, I'm certainly not aware of any large scale data breaches. I think there have been some with credit card data from some of the direct to consumer genetic testing companies, but not genetic data as far as I'm aware.
And in full disclosure, I should say my previous company, Patients Like Me, had incidents where people would sort of get in and try and make fake accounts and try and copy data. We actually read a whole manuscript about it called Digital Trespass. the upsetting thing, it was mostly academics, it was mostly computer scientists who were sort of saying, well, I'm a AI person and I would like some data to feed my AI model, so I'll just go and borrow this data, and it's on the internet, and because it's on the internet, I guess it's free. And what was fascinating was because, unlike, you said, Rakhi, you're a psychologist, me too, before you even learn about experimental methodology, you learn about ethics and all the reasons why we have review boards. Their philosophy was, we're computer scientists, therefore it's not medical research, even though it's just data. And I had the same argument come to me 5 or 6 times from leading institutions around the world. It was absolutely bizarre. But a related question has come in on the Q&A. Is there a distinction about participants' concerns over their sequencing data versus their phenotypic data? And actually, I noticed a thread in the report today that suggested people could find something out, and I've seen related concerns about this. So, for example, if you've donated your data because you want to be part of a diabetes study, for example, and then you get this little flag saying, congratulations, your data has been used in a schizophrenia study, you might reasonably think, hello, why is my data being analysed in that? Or perhaps if you were doing it for diabetes, but it said, what are all the other conditions you have, or what are the treatments you're taking? And maybe you've had a medication you consider embarrassing, something for your mental health or something very personal to you. And now you're sort of getting additional sort of information about your phenotype. So do you get that there's, perhaps, I suppose, a distinction in how people are sensitive about genotypic versus phenotypic information? Or maybe it doesn't really matter.
Imagine we'll all probably have some thoughts on that. I'm happy to go first, and Jillian, Rahki maybe next. I think there actually is a distinction, but it's not so much on genetic or phenotypic lines, but more about, are we revealing new information that a participant may not know already or not? And I think this just so happens to be the case much more frequently with genetic information, that you will know if you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, or if it runs in your family, but you may not know that you're a genetic carrier of an ApoE4 allele. So the way that information is disclosed, if it's disclosed, I think is incredibly important. It's something we've thought a lot about and continue to think a lot about, because it's not just as simple as revealing that information. You have to think about the branching tree of, what if the source information happens to be wrong? There's a chance of that. What if the participant needs real life support from a genetic counselor or a telegenetic counselor? What if they have family members that need to get involved? So you really have to think through the human element. One of the interesting things as we've been building this platform is we've been talking to other Genomics England kind of sized organizations in other countries around the world. And in particular, there are quite a few in other parts of Europe. Estonia, Finland, Denmark, all have national scale programs. And the legislation is really different in different parts of the world. So in Estonia, for example, they're doing large scale recontact based on genetic data to inform people about familial hypercholesterolemia status. In the UK, we're certainly not there. In the US, I don't think we're there, although probably somewhere in the middle, because there's certain genes that people are happy to report on. But I think one of the biggest questions over the next 10 years or so is going to be, how do we responsibly disclose information back to participants that they may not already know from their genetic information? Where is it that we should feel compelled to let people know because there's a real medical benefit from knowing, and what's the support structure around that, and what's the rest of the spectrum where it's maybe elective, and how do we design educational systems around that so that people know what they may learn before they get into the process? That's kind of how I see it broadly.
That's absolutely, yeah, I completely agree. And I think that's something which is currently being unpacked a little bit in the work that Genomics England are doing with other partners, looking at the potential of doing newborn screening using whole genome sequencing, because that raises a whole lot of questions about, well, if this information is collected at a particular point in time, how much of it's useful now, how much of it isn't useful now but might be useful in a foreseeable time period, how much of it is something which gives an indication of what might go wrong in somebody's health 30 years from now that they can't actually do anything about, and who gets to know what and when, is a whole ethical minefield, really. And I think the only way that we can move forward as a society is to have very open, deliberative conversations around that. And as Rahki mentioned earlier, the sorts of studies that have been done up to now have been exploring where people's red lines are and to establish where society feels is an appropriate use of this technology, and where perhaps it's in danger of opening a Pandora's box that we can't do anything with, or anything that would be appropriate to do with just now.
And Rakhi, did you want to add anything to that?
I think Patrick and Gillian have covered that adequately, but I did want to pick up on something that I just saw in the chat, which is around the importance of genetic counsellors in this conversation. And yeah, I just wanted to emphasise, I've just seen that pop up in the chat, and I wanted to emphasise the importance of genetic counsellors in the dialogue as crucial.
Yeah, and something directly to that, the 100,000 Genomes Project has now returned a main finding for all the participants, or most of the families anyway, at least back to the NHS. I think some of them are still working their way through the system to get back to the patients. But the next task for Genomics England is to look at the additional findings where participants had asked for information about their genetic predisposition to certain conditions that can be assessed using the whole genome sequencing information that's been collected about them. And the whole process of trying to deliver that has ended up proving much more complicated than anyone thought at the beginning, because we've had to think through the process and the patient journey. And you can't just tell somebody, we've found something, report to this breast clinic and we'll tell you some more. That just, it raises so many alarm bells. It would just be awful. So you have to very carefully take people through a pathway which is going to offer them support exactly when they need it, in a way that they can access without traumatizing them, frankly. Otherwise, you can do more damage than good.
No. So I was just going to reflect out one more comment that we've had in the chat window, and then I'm going to come to each of you for maybe a minute on what your ideal future would be like. So, Patrick mentioned a 10-year time horizon. So in 2031, when your magic wish dreams have come true, how does participant engagement and research, how has that transformed genomics and medicine? So the comment was that although a lot of the issues we've raised about someone consenting for their data to be used in one disease and perhaps being surprised or angry or disappointed that it shows up in another, although there are some very real ethical risks about that, the potential may be that the way we have bucketed conditions is all wrong, and that actually looking across diseases could be very useful. We see so much overlap, say in immunology or even parts of neurology, that actually the way we've classified things, because some 19th century psychiatrist was the first to diagnose this one, whereas the 20th century neurologist that was the first to diagnose this one, well, as it turns out, if they'd seen a geneticist, they're all the same thing, just at different ends of the spectrum. So that's really key. And I suppose if that led to an effective treatment, then we would have to squash those concerns down a little bit, or at least make them secondary, right? Because ultimately we can mitigate these things, but ultimately we want to move forward. So Patrick, take us into Blade Runner territory. 2031, what does this look like when you have achieved all your OKRs?
I love this question. So I think that we're on an inevitable march towards personalized medicine. That is the direction things are going. I think the biggest question mark is how long it takes us to get there, and I think what it looks like when we arrive. So the big role that I see participant engagement in particular playing in that is, at the moment we have a 10 to 15 year cycle from discovery in the lab, at best, this is best case scenario, discovery in a lab through to first patient in a healthcare system receives new treatment therapy. It could be digital, could be a drug. And I think where the only kind of people that cut across that whole spectrum are the participants. They are the people who are involved in the earliest stage research all the way through to the healthcare system. So if we can transform the system to have the participant at the center and use not just digital technology, but other technologies to create a feedback loop that's far faster from discovery to identify if it meets a real participant patient need through to early stage studies, clinical studies, testing in the population, and understand really quickly in the healthcare system, who's it working better for, who's it working worse for, where are the gaps, and feed that back into the system. So having an operating system, so to speak, of running more and more personalized medicine at a much greater pace is the direction that I think we need to go. And how I think that will ultimately end up is we'll have very transformative therapies for rare diseases in the form of RNA interference, gene editing, gene therapies, small molecules that are where the biology is really understood. And I think we'll also see very large scale preventive and predictive measures through polygenic risk scoring and integrating that with clinical data to help us not get common chronic diseases until far later in life or never at all. So that's my sort of 30,000 foot view, but love to hear the others.
Yeah, a flywheel of flywheels. Brilliant. Okay, Rakhi. The future's bright, the future's orange.
Sounds to me like Patrick's just described it for all of us in many ways. I think our aim is that everyone benefits from genomics and genomic medicine, and that is core to what we do, which means that we really do need to put patients and participants at the core and understand what those journeys should be and those pathways should be, and intentionally design the conversation, but also the path from a symptom to diagnosis to through all of those things. And I think what's powerful about what we're doing is that this is about not just diagnosing someone, but about diagnosis. It's about treatment. It's about the research, and it's about bringing all of those things together. And for us, we really do think about the world as there's stuff that's happening in the clinical side of things. I'm being very simplistic in my language here, and we're doing research, right? It's if you bring those two worlds together and really bring those two worlds together, they inform each other in a way that means we can be transformative in our understanding of this, and then how it's used in the clinical environment. And I think that's really, really key.
You could help them gel, to coin a phrase for gel. Brilliant. Okay, Jillian, you should have the final word.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I would. Yeah, it's wonderful. Patrick just gave us the widescreen view there, and Rakhi's come into something much more practical and personal to people like me who are living with loved ones who are quite severely disabled in many cases. I think what I would love to see is as soon as a health condition presents in somebody, you can find out why it's happening. You can find out, you can be. At the moment, you can talk to your doctor, but that's usually where the conversation ends. So then being able to carry that forward into finding the research expertise around the world, it's going to have to be, who may already have some experience in this, to then form essentially a multidisciplinary team, patient, clinician and researcher, to work together in finding, if not reusing treatments which already exist in other conditions which could translate across, or whether it's developing a unique solution for that particular genetic disorder. That would just be wonderful. And I know that there are probably more diseases out there than there are researchers to look at them at the moment. But I think, the way things are going, this field is becoming more well known as we go forward. And I think, 10 years from now, people are actually going to go to their careers advisors and say, I want to be a bioinformatician, whereas before no one even knew what that was. So, things
it was something you accidentally fell into after studying other things.
Exactly. So, these sorts of things are coming slowly, but I think, just that holistic patient experience where you can find somebody who has the technical expertise to make sense of your lived condition and move forward together would just be wonderful.
Absolutely. Great. Well, we are at time. The time has moved quickly. So thank you again to Jillian Hastings Ward, to Rakhi Rajani and to Patrick Short. I hope if you've enjoyed this meeting, you'll follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. TikTok, do we have a TikTok? Maybe we could get a TikTok. No? Okay, maybe next time. But thanks so much. Hope you've enjoyed the conversation. Please do follow us on social media. We'll be having other webinars like this, and please do to comment, and there will be a recording made available later on if there were bits that you wanted to go over or to share this with colleagues. But thank you to everybody for participating from Darling and all over the world, for your questions and comments. Hope you have a good evening, afternoon, week, and we'll see you in 2031 when this is all solved. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Bye.